back to Obsession Engineering for another instalment of the Henry's Honda SP1 Restoration. It's still a bit cold in the workshop, so I've still got my big coat on, and even more important today, I've got nipples. Nice, hard, shiny nipples. So the first thing I'm going to do is fit these and bleed the brakes up. So if you've never seen inside a bleed nipple before, and frankly, why would you? All it is a little hole that goes down the tube of the bleed nipple, and then a taper. And when you screw the bleed nipple in, the tapered end sort of seals into a taper in the caliper, stops any fluid coming past. So it's fairly simple. As soon as you open the bleed nipple up, you just loosen it slightly, the fluid can come past the taper and then comes out the hole. And really what you're trying to do is get the air out of the system and as little fluid out as possible. So to bleed the brakes up, we have obviously a full reservoir of brake fluid, nice and clean. We have the mass cylinder at the top, which is just a pump, and all that's going to do is pump fluid that way, down the brake lines, down there, and into the caliper. And then obviously it's meant to pressurise in the caliper, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to open the bleed nipple off, and that's just going to let air out of the caliper until the caliper is full of fluid. We will get quite a lot of fluid out as well, but that is how it works. So yeah, all we do really is we put a little bit of pressure in the system from the mass cylinder, open the bleed nipple up, let the pressure out, which is hopefully mostly air, close it off again, and then when we open the mass cylinder, it just lets the fluid back in from the reservoir. It will take quite a lot of time to bleed all the air out of the system. Because I've got the calipers completely empty from when I've cleaned them, and I've got new brake lines on, most of the system's completely dry, so it is taking some time to bleed all the air out of the system and get everything full of fluid. But it will be worth it in the end, because otherwise the brakes wouldn't work. So I know we're getting fairly close because the lever is going fairly stiff, but I'm still going to put a couple of sort of extra reservoirs worth of fluid through it because I want to make sure there's absolutely no air in the system. So that's the lever nice and firm, so I'm confident we've got all the air out of it. I've got the level sort of just over halfway up, and especially down at the caliper end, I've had a really good clean around with some brake cleaner just to make sure there's absolutely no brake fluid on anything, because it will eat through paintwork if you let it. So everything's been thoroughly cleaned. I'll just do the back brake next, which is exactly the same system again, and then we can move on to something more interesting. It's no good. I'm going to have a little bit of a rant. I like standard levers, standard brake levers especially. They're nice and long, so you get more leverage, which is the whole point of a lever, and they don't fall apart and all the adjusters work, and you are guaranteed they are going to work unless you break them in half. Whereas aftermarket ones, Henry likes this brake lever, so I'm leaving it on. It does seem a reasonable quality one, but there are some horrible, nasty, cheap things floating around on the internet. So just before you go and buy the cheapest thing you can find on eBay, ask yourself the question: that point when a car's pulling out on you and you're pulling as hard as you can on the lever, do you really want to trust it to the cheapest thing on the internet? Now that the chassis is pretty much all done, I'm moving on to the engine. The absolute living heart and soul of the bike, and really quite interesting to fiddle with. On this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the side covers because they're meant to be sort of lightly polished from the factory, and they're not bad at all. There's no corrosion on them, but they're not looking at their best. So I'm going to take the side covers off and give them a bit of a clean. I've also got a clutch modification to do, so that'll be useful. But I think what we'll do is we'll start at the top end. I'm going to whip the air box off, check the air filter, and I'm going to give everything a bit of a clean up starting at the top so the dirt runs downwards, and I may as well check the valve clearances and do the plugs and bits while I'm here. So I've actually decided on the engine I'm going to start by removing the radiators, get those out of the way, and it gives me access to quite a lot of the stuff that's behind them and underneath them, and I can give everything a bit of a clean as well. After I've done that, I shall move on to removing the airbox, so I'll get to rocker covers and bits so I can start looking at valve clearances. So draining the coolant out of the system is fairly simple. You undo the bottom pipe and let all the coolant drain out into a bucket. Fairly simple. And then it's just a case of undoing a few screws that hold the radiators on, undoing the hose clips and wiggling everything free. But the hoses are relatively short, so we might have to do a little bit of jiggery pokery to sort of loosen them off, what I can sometimes do is either get a big pair of pipe grips and just give them a little bit of a wiggle to try and break the seal, or even just try and get a screwdriver and very gently give them a bit of a tweak. What we don't want to do is put much stress on it and actually start damaging the radiator or trying to pull the pipes off the radiator itself. So yeah, they can be a bit of a game, so we've just got to be a little bit gentle with it. So that's the radiators both removed. They actually came out nice and easily. Behind them, it's just, a little bit dirty because you can't get in to clean it, but there's no damage or anything under there, which is a good sign. The other side is just as good. The next thing I'm actually going to do is take the oil cooler off. Now, the oil cooler is looking a little bit grotty because it's had a lot of debris thrown at it, but might be a bit of a game to actually clean it up much. We're going to do what we can, but we have to admit, really the only way to actually make it look like new would probably be to have a new one. So while the oil cooler and its pipes are having a little holiday in the degrease tank, I'm just going to start cleaning up around the rest of the motor. I'm probably going to whip the airbox off as well so I can get into the top, give everything a bit of a clean up where I can, and then we can start actually looking inside. Because what we don't want to do is start taking bits of the engine apart while there's loads of dirt around it, because then you just end up with the dirt on the inside. That's really not good. Taking the airbox off should be fairly straightforward. Take all the screws out of it and take the top off, and then see what's inside and see what there is to undo there to take the whole lot out. Generally fairly straightforward. Hopefully this one won't put up too much of a fight. So that's the airbox lid off. The air filters are just sat there and they're sort of clipped in with little split pins, and there's just little screws either side of the bell mouths to take the bell mouths off, which actually holds the airbox on. So I'm going to undo those. There's even a little cover here that you undo to get the screwdriver down into the screw on the front bell mouth. So nicely positioned at Mr. Honda, thank you very much. So what we'll do next is unscrew all of that and lift the whole airbox off. So that's the airbox removed. Additional to the screws I was showing you earlier onto the throttle bodies, there's also this little pipe down here that goes off to the sort of rebreather system that gets fresh air into the exhaust for cleaner emissions. And there's just a couple of breather pipes down this side. So I've got all that off, and then if we have a look down in the hole, down there you can't really see it very well in the light, but it's really quite grotty, because what you tend to do is any oil or anything that breathes back into the airbox, it sort of gets washed down onto here, and of course any debris that can get up the fairing a bit, and it's gathered in the V, and it looks a bit grotty. So I think what I might do is I might take the throttle bodies off, seal everything up around the inlets very carefully, and then I might take it outside for another coat of degreasing, just to get absolutely as much of the dirt out of it as possible. So taking the throttle bodies off should be fairly straightforward. There is one big block connector that undoes all the connections to the injectors and the throttle bodies, and then I need to go down this end and undo the throttle cables and just take them off the pulley. So once they're all undone, it should be a fairly straightforward case of undoing the clamps that sit actually underneath the throttle body themselves, one obviously behind the cylinder head, and then we should just be able to give them a bit of a wiggle and pop the whole lot off. So that's the throttle bodies off. They were a bit tight in the inlet rubbers, but that's no great surprise after 20 years, so a little bit of wiggling, they did come off. Then I also took off the thermostat and the water pipes that run across the V so that I could get in a bit further, and you can see now how terribly unpleasant it is down there. So, ignoring the breather that I labelled incorrectly earlier as the pair valve, that's the pair valve, what we're going to do next is push the bike outside, cover all of these in plastic so I don't get any water anywhere that shouldn't have water in it, give it a thorough degreasing, and then I can let it all dry out before we actually start doing anything inside the engine. Look how lovely and shiny and clean it is down there. The nice thing with it being sort of oil out the breathers and bits that's somehow just ended up in the middle of the V, it's all quite easy to degrease and take off, and everything underneath it is like brand new, so that's a bit of a bonus. I am going to do a little bit of digging and see if I can find out where it's all been coming from, though I suspect a lot of it's probably just been draining out the bottom of the airbox. So, that's good stuff. I've given it all a bit of a blow down so it's nice and dry, so I suppose I ought to take some more stuff apart really. It's nearing the end of the day, so I decided I'm going to save doing all the engine work for tomorrow, and I thought instead I would take out the big bolt that holds the crash bungs on and replace it with the new correct engine bolt that I've got from my local friendly Honda dealer. The only slight problem with that is this engine bolt is seized in here absolutely solid. I've had a blowtorch on it with a lot of heat, I've had hammers on it, I've had an extractor trying to actually drag it out by the thread, and then that snapped off. So what I'm actually going to have to do is drill it out. So that's not going to be terribly good fun, but it is going to have to be done. Might have made a little rod for my own back there. Oh well, such is life. In preparation for drilling the bolt out, I've ground the head flat and I've centre popped it as close to the centre as I can so that my pilot drill will be somewhere near the middle of the bolt. So I'm going to pilot drill it as deep as possible, and then I'm going to get in with a fairly big drill, just at maybe 1/2 mil smaller than the actual stud itself, and drill as deep as I can, take out as much material as possible. So I'm happy that my pilot hole is pretty central and as deep as I can get it. So now I'm going to go in with a sensible size drill bit. I'm going to go in with 9.5 mil drill, because the bolt is 10 mil, and hopefully that will take out the absolute bulk of the material, take most of the strength of the bolt out with it. What should have taken about 5 minutes has taken much nearer 5 hours, and most of the actual bolt is now debris on the bench. There's some bits down there. I ended up actually having to drill it from both ends and then punch out what was left after I'd taken the strength out of it. So that wasn't much fun, but it had to be done. That is our nice new shiny engine bolt in. I've given the front of the motor a bit of a clean as well, got as much grime and bits off it as I can. There is a little bit of staining on the cases, but there's not really a lot we can do about that, other than taking the whole engine apart and vapour blasting stuff, which is not really practical at this stage. So that is that bit of the job done. What should have been 5 minutes took 5 hours, but such is life. Next thing to do is some engine work. Thanks for watching. It's been another busy day in the workshop, and next time we might actually get inside the engine. Probably. Maybe.